everyone. My name is Rehana Mohammed. Welcome to the fourth episode of hashtag Semifix and Chill with the CSIR. We're very excited. We have two episodes to go. As you can see on both mine and Chumisa's background, we are celebrating the role of basic sciences in the modern world under the hashtag NSW 2022. And when we celebrate the role of basic sciences, we also want to look at how we're promoting public understanding of science and the importance of people like Chumisa Ndlazi. Chumisa is a CSIR media relations practitioner. She's also a science communicator. So I'm going to hand over to her in a moment. But before I do so, we are welcoming your questions, your comments. Please post them in the chat box and Chumisa will have an opportunity to respond to them. So I'm going to turn off my camera now, Chumisa. Spotlight is on you. Go for it.
All right, thanks, Rihanna. So I'm absolutely delighted to be a part of the STEMI Flex and Chill session. And as mentioned already, my name is Chumisa Ndlazi, and I am a media relations practitioner at the CSIR. But just for a bit of background and context, I suppose, I'm originally from Ebisho. And Ebisho is a small town in the Eastern Cape, and it actually happens to be the capital of the Eastern Cape. And I went to a school called Kingsridge High School for Girls in King Williamstown. And I started my schooling from preschool up until matric at the same school, which is the Kingsridge High School. And my subjects were maths lit though. I did history, I did English, consumer studies, computer applications technology, as well as this is Xhosa as a second language. So it's kind of odd that I find myself in the science communication space because I didn't do science and I wasn't a maths person. It wasn't really my strongest subject in school. So it's very odd for me that today I find myself being in a space where I have to communicate the sciences. But nonetheless, I think it's been such a wonderful journey in the sense that I've also learned to understand the importance of it. And I've also been able to navigate myself throughout this journey by also just being able to maybe speak to the researchers and being on the ground and basically getting an opportunity to relate with the researchers and the kind of work that they do and finding different ways and creative ways and methods of communicating the work that they do. So yeah, that's pretty much it on my side. And I think one of the things that I also find quite interesting about the science comm space is that it's never the same day. So you get to deal with different projects and at the same time, you also get to understand the importance of the work that the researchers do. And once you understand the work they do, then you also have to find ways to simplify the work that they are doing and how it basically relates to communities, how it relates to industry, how it relates to SMMEs. So I think this is one of the things that I also find very interesting. And because I was also in varsity, I was into politics because that's what I also thought I'd get into at some point. But I also find that through science communication, I've also been able to find my voice. I've also been able to find my form of activism. And in doing so, I think that's one of the things that I also try to do in my space, which is as a science communicator, is to try and find the stories that really show the impact of the work that our researchers do and how science basically impacts communities and also just changing the face of science, because I think a lot of the time, for the longest time, people were were intimidated by science, and the general perception around science is that it is intimidating and you find a lot of people shy away from it. But I think one of the things that as science communicators in our role and a responsibility is to kind of debunk the sciences and make it more accessible to people and make it more understandable and contextualize it, so that it doesn't seem so intimidating and that people can actually see that science is always around us and it affects everything that we do, and it affects the politics, it affects our daily lives and how we navigate our daily lives. So I think that's one of the things that as a science communicator that I think I take pride in, is that it's part of my duty to break down those barriers and to bridge the gap between the public as well as the scientists. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it on my side.
Okay, so that's your story and you're sticking to it.
That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
So we're both from the Eastern Cape, interestingly.
Oh.
Yes, small town girls.
Know.
Yes. Okay. Etinaga. It's called Kariga now. It's about a few kilometers from PE. So I also did not do math or science. But clearly you from the math lit generation.
Yeah. So I think another thing, Rihanna, is that I think also I was very aware of my strengths, and my strengths were more on the English side as opposed to the math slits, or rather to the math side. But I also think what's also interesting for people to note is that science is for everyone. It's not just restricted to the scientists. There's also space for your communicators. There's also space for HR people within the sciences, because in as much as we have a role to communicate, but the HR people have the role to attract the right talent and so on and so forth. So there is a space for everyone to contribute into the sciences and kind of make the value chain work, and support it so that the word gets out there.
So interestingly, you mentioned you never did math or science. And you had an interest in politics when you were in university. How did you end up in science communication?
I stumbled upon it.
Same with me. Hands up, hands up. Same with me.
I actually didn't even know that there was something called science communication. Yeah. And I think this is why it's important, the work that we do, and of course you would also know this, it's important for us to expose young people to the different kind of career paths that exist within the sciences. I think it also speaks to what we were doing just not so long ago with the Career Day, exposing young people to the sciences and the career paths that exist, and how I came to know of this of CSIR was because I was looking for a job, and there was an internship program available, and I applied for it. I was very skeptical, of course, because I wasn't too sure about whether or not I would fit in, because of course I don't have a science background or maths background, and I didn't think the environment would be welcoming. But to my surprise, and this still is true, it was very welcoming. I got to understand it. I got to work with the researchers who were very kind enough to explain their work and to explain how the CSIR works as well. So I think it allowed me to ease into the environment and into the space in itself. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question here, which I think you've already answered. So is it necessary to have a background in science in order to succeed as a science communicator? And if not, are there any bridging courses one can take? So I think if you can just answer that, if there is a bridging course, and if not, how did you find your feet? And was it an easy transition?
Yeah. So there are courses available. Stellenbosch, in fact, offers quite a few short courses in science communication. So to the second point of how did I find myself, or how did I navigate the area? I think another thing that people need to understand, that there's a difference between scientific communication. So that would be the scientists communicating amongst each other through conferences and so on and so forth. But there's also science communication, which is communicating with the public in layman terms. So translating the research, and this is now where you have to work with the researchers to understand the kind of work that they do, but also kind of bring up the stories where you can highlight the impact of the work. So I would say, in my view, it's important to have your ordinary people who are not necessarily in the sciences to communicate the sciences so that it's more relatable to the public and it's able to reach and have an impact that it needs to your public. Yeah.
So on that note, what has been the most challenging subject matter that you've had to communicate and that you had to take it and translate it into layman terms?
Definitely novel lasers. So I worked with the laser team and very closely with the laser team, and within the laser team, there are different sections, and one of them was novel laser research group. I found that to be quite challenging because it is quite abstract. And I think as a person who obviously didn't do the sciences, I'm very quick to want to understand what is the impact. And how does it benefit communities? How does it benefit industry? But it's also so important for you not to always quickly jump in to understand the impact, but also taking the time to also understand the science in itself, so that you don't water down what you're trying to communicate. You respect it, but at the same time, you do it in such a way that you'll be able to simplify it. So I think for me, that was probably one of the most challenging projects that I've worked on and I was tasked to do.
Okay, so in one sentence then, the impact of the novel lasers, what does it mean to South Africans? Why should South Africans care?
So I think if you look at also just in general how we are moving towards the fourth industrial revolution and digital technologies, from your smartphones, lasers are used. So it's basically the use of light for different technologies and in different spaces. So I think the key thing is you find that lasers are very important in terms of in terms of being used for different technologies, specifically in the 4R space. And when we speak about the fourth industrial revolution, what are the opportunities that novel lasers have, or lasers in general, and in what applications they can be used? So I think that's one of the things I think, in my view, lasers are very important for. And also looking at aerospace, for instance, in the 3D printing, lasers are also used in that sense, but using powder, titanium powder. So that's also another technology that is often used in the manufacturing industry. So it can be used in different applications and in modern ways. Yeah.
Yeah, so Chumisa, when I started working in this space, social media was brand new. I think Facebook was the in thing at the time. So the tools of a communicator's trade has obviously broadened a lot. We think about the last decade. We've got Twitter, we've got TikTok, we've got Instagram. There's blogs. People are disseminating information on WhatsApp, etc. So, in your experience, has these tools contributed to a public understanding of science, or have they just completely derailed it?
No, absolutely. I think it's made science also very accessible. If you look specifically during COVID-19 pandemic, how a lot of researchers or people in the science space were using social media as a tool to kind of communicate and break down what COVID-19 meant and how it would affect or impact people's lives and the numbers. What does it mean and how is it impacting, the economy or impacting the way people move even. So I think in terms of just making information far more accessible, social media has played a huge role. But at the same time, you also see how it can be quite dangerous if it's not used correctly because of the misinformation as well. So you really have to kind of balance the two. And the manner in which we consume social media also is very important, because you find that there's false information that can also be spread through social media. So it's very important for us to be able to differentiate between what kind of sources we use or we refer to gain our information, and just also be aware of the kind of things to look out for when consuming your information on social media, specifically in the sciences. But generally, I think social media has been absolutely great in terms of just making it accessible and and contextualizing science for the general public.
I have to agree with that. I think there's been a lot more benefit than there has been, derailing of efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you spoke about the differences between science communication and scientific communication. But what are some of the differences between science communication and journalism?
So I think okay, so I always view it as science communicators need to work very closely with the journalists. So science communication would be in the sense of being able to write for the public and having direct relations with the researchers. And then what we would do as science communicators is take that information and share it with the journalists. And the journalist, I think's role responsibility is to take that information and to kind of break it down further, so that or break it down further in bite sizes, so that it's more relatable to their target audience. So I think there's a huge difference, and also because journalists could cover a whole lot of beats. So it could be something along politics, economics, financial beats, for instance, where you do financial journalism, but science communication is specifically dealing with researchers and the dissemination of science or of the sciences. And I also think, Rihanna, there's another element to science communication that we sometimes forget, that it's not just about the writing, but it's also about events. So, as a science communicator, I would want to know what kind of platforms do I need to set up to maybe get, our scientists engaging with the public. So that would be an event aspect to it. But there's also the writing aspect that I already mentioned. There's also a media aspect to it. So it's a whole facets of things that are basically put into this bag, and you have to kind of tap into everything to kind of like fulfill the role of being a science communicator. Whereas a journalist would be more writing on the writing side and dealing with the media and making sure that the information is disseminated through a media platform for the public.
Okay, so you spoke about this issue of journalists being on different beats. Do you think we have enough journalists out there in South Africa specifically that are well versed and are able to take what we give them as science communicators, or even a media release that is issued, and then translate that for their specific audiences, whatever publication that is? Do you think we have enough journalists working on the science beat?
So no, absolutely not. And I think I look at how, when we also, sending out media releases to journalists, even just picking the right journalists to communicate that science information or science content that we've distributed to them, it's quite difficult. And I think this is why it's a very niche space, and I think it's a new space. And more so specifically, I have noticed that through the different courses that are now coming about through the different universities, that there's an increasing need for more science communicators to come into the space. Because, as we all know, I think with the world that is now fast developing, we are seeing how a lot of things are science is becoming a very important role, or
absolutely
a very important role in how things are done in the country and how things are even translated and seen in the world. So there is a need for us to tap into the sciences and getting more people to write about the sciences and to cover the sciences in general. So generally, I would say no, there isn't enough, but I do think there's absolutely a need for us to grow in that space and to have more scientists, or at least journalists, cover that beat.
Absolutely. Okay, so what is one of the most challenging aspects of science communication?
I think quite a few. And I think one of the things is because we are not necessarily well versed in the sciences. It's being able to sit down with the researchers and talk through the science, and then translate that information in more simple terms.
But also, I think that makes your job a lot more difficult as well, because now you've got a scientist, right? And their field of expertise is lasers. But you don't only work with that scientist or that field. Yeah. So you actually have to know quite a lot. And especially if you think about an organization like the CSIR, we've got, 9 clusters. Yeah. And each cluster has several, experts in various fields.
Yeah. Absolutely, and this is why I was saying initially that it's challenging, but it's also very interesting because no day is the same. You will be required to work with maybe the biophotonics group, and some days you'll be required to work with you know, your bioprocessing group and so on and so forth. So, but I do think what is has been interesting for me and as part of my career journey is just knowing that there are different kinds of sciences. So we're not just limited to one form of science, but there are different kinds of sciences, and being able to tap into those, all the different aspects of it, I think it shows also how well versed we are as a country and the kind of capabilities we have as a country that are not just limited to one thing, but we've got a diverse kind of opportunities and capabilities that industry and the country and the community can tap into. And it's our responsibility to translate that as a result as science communicators. Yeah.
So you've spoken about the challenging aspects. So what do you love most about it? To know that every day is different. What about it do you love the most?
I think what I really enjoy the most is because I think, as I had mentioned, I come from a small town, the Eastern Cape. And as you would know, the Eastern Cape is not so information privileged. There's a lot of issues around access to information. And I think my form of activism is science communication as a result, because I get the opportunity to just kind of like tell the public about the importance of science and what opportunities there are and how they can tap into those opportunities, just so that I can ensure that, the underserved communities are not left behind. And I think another thing for me that's also very interesting is that it's the constant getting into a space of trying to creatively communicate this information so that it can educate, it can inform, and it can raise awareness. So I think that for me is something I genuinely love. And I think it's so important for us to document these things. And this is why we do what we do, so that people can look back and say, this is the role of our African scientists and this is their impact.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that you didn't know about science communication, that there's actually a career in that space, and I can absolutely relate to that. So how would you grow awareness of, that, to let people know, like you said, you enjoyed English as a subject, and that's how you found yourself naturally just drawn to this space. But at the time, you did not know that science communication was an actual career. So how would you grow? How could we, as a country, perhaps, or even as an organization, grow awareness of science communication as a career?
Sure. I think pretty much what we've been doing, if you've been, of course you would know, we've been having the career days. And I think it's so important for us to kind of diversify our outlook of what science is and what science means. So not to just say, of course, granted, it's very important for us to attract a lot of young people to take on the sciences, but there's also another aspect, and showing another aspect and a different side to the sciences, to say that there's also a communication side to science. There's also, an HR side to science. There's also a business development side to science. So being able to have career expos, to being able to have outreach programs, specifically in the underserved communities, and taking the science to the people and showing them the different career paths that exist, I think would be very important, specifically from the time where, learners have to choose subjects. Because I think had I known and we had career days, for instance, I may have picked differently, for instance. So I think there are certain things that I think we could do just to add on and to show a different side and a different narrative, to say that there are various options within the sciences. And even if you don't do maths, or if you're not really strong in science, you do have a space and you do have a role to play. So I think for me, that would be very key.
I think that's a very important point you're making, Chumisa, because National Science Week is pushing the STEM careers, but an important aspect is the role that we play as science communicators as well, because you can conduct the science, you can do the experiments, you can perform really well in the lab, but if no one knows about it, what is the point? So that's really our role. I just want to circle back to science journalism. Is the CSIR playing any role there in terms of just equipping journalists with the skills and perhaps maybe the confidence as well to pursue an article from a science perspective, because like you said, our lives are affected obviously by science.
So I do think we are playing a role to a certain extent. And I mean, I look at how, for instance, through the Media Relations Department, which is part of the Strategic Communications Department, we do have a whole lot of engagements with journalists. So, for instance, through SASTA, for instance, SASTA also would play a role. We have a lot of media networks that we tap into, and we almost have an opportunity to bring these journalists onto campus and to say, this is the kind of work that we do. Media briefings as well is another way to equip journalists. And I think those kind of network sessions allow journalists to kind of come into our world and see the kind of work that we do, and come into the spaces and interact with the researchers, see the kind of facilities we have and how this research takes place. I think those are some of the ways where if we have or create open door policies in that sense, we can kind of start encouraging those links and engagements and communication between the journalists and the researchers and ourselves to take place, so that they're more confident and more equipped and more comfortable when having to write particular stories. So I think those are some of the ways in which we engage the media as a department.
And I would think specifically community media, like you said, we know in the Eastern Cape that access to information is not quite there.
Yeah.
So working with community media is definitely very important. Okay, so I think we've run through our questions. I'm going to give you an opportunity to just final words of advice to the young people out there. Maybe you have a message to media as well. Go for it.
Thank you. So I think for me, I would say don't shy away from, exploring the opportunities that exist within the sciences. And I also think just because somebody doesn't take on a science as a subject or maths as a subject, it doesn't mean that science does not affect you. It affects you, and it's a part of your daily life. So I would say, take the opportunity to understand what opportunities there are out there, speak to different people who are well versed in that particular industry, and see what you could learn from them. I think for me, for instance, if I didn't take the time to talk to people, to network with the researchers, and to ask questions, I don't think I would have progressed or gotten to a point where I'm very comfortable to write and to communicate science in a way that I think is comfortable for me. And I think just to the media, I think I would say that, with COVID-19 happening and us talking about fourth industrial revolution, it's very important now more than ever to create the links between scientists and the media and journalists specifically, to see how we can partner up to kind of disseminate this information so that nobody gets left behind.
Thank you. Very wise words there. So there you have it. You don't have to be strong in math and science to end up in the science domain and to end up working at the CSIR either. Okay, thank you so much, Chumisa, for joining us today for this fourth episode of hashtag STEM Essential with the CSIR. I hope you've enjoyed it at home. When you joining us, the YouTube link is live. It's going to be remaining on CSIR New Media's page. So please do share this with your friends, with your family, with your peers as well. It's 12:30 now, so please join us again at 1, where we will be hosting our last episode of hashtag STEM Essential. From me, thank you and goodbye.